ones in the pictures.
We do. Some future realtors.
Cute ones, yeah.
Yeah, this one is home with me till the 10th because her teacher tested positive for COVID.
So that's what happened to Leslie.
Oh, really?
Exactly the same thing. So she's got the same deal.
Yeah.
So the recording stopped. Did you want? Okay, now it's back on.
Okay.
All right.
So I know there's one or two more that are joining us, but it's already 7 after, so we might as well get started. So Tom,
Sure.
thanks so much for joining us today. Any time that we have with you is time well spent. So, I think it was pretty general, open-ended conversation today. We asked Tom maybe to share some tips on things that those of us that are on the call that are a little bit newer realtors, within or even older realtors, some things that we could be doing right now to, finish off the year, things that we could really focus on to make sure that we hit 2022 strong and we're running, and just any tidbits that he has to share. And also, if you guys have any questions for Tom, I mean, what a great captive audience we have right now. So either, raise your hand. I'll be watching the chat. So if you guys want to put it in the chat, totally up to you. So Tom, I'm going to hand it. Oh, that's even better. There we go. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, first of all, Rhonda, thank you for all that. It's always a privilege to just get into a room with as many people as we possibly can and just talk about real estate and talk about the challenges of today. It's obvious that this market has been extremely rapid in pace over the last couple of years. It's just, it's been kind of amazing to watch in a Midwestern market, kind of the seismic increase in values. And now over, let's say, the last 45 or 60 days, kind of a leveling off a bit. So I'd like to start with, and then of course there's no mandate here other than we just would love to have interactive dialogue. So I want to hear give and take. I'd like you to talk to each other. There's always so much benefit. I think the one thing that we can really hang our hat on in this organization, and it certainly isn't me, it's been all of you, is the ability to collaborate, share thoughts and ideas and strategies and learn from one another. And that's from the person in their first deal to somebody who's been dragging the knuckles for 30 years. So there's always opportunities for growth and learning and what have you. So what I'd like to do, because I asked Tim, I said, hey, what do you think is kind of the buzzwords? And he said, we asked, a few things. And so what I'd like to do is just, meaning of the folks that potentially be on. So what I'd like to do is just start by, and maybe I can get into some tangents after that, God knows I can do that. But I'd like to just start by just opening up the dialogue and just hearing from somebody a challenge that seems unique to them at this particular point in time, or maybe not unique to them, but unique to their experience or something that they're dealing with or have been dealing with, that maybe we can all put our heads together and think about how we would solve it. Case study, issue, problem, could be business development, could be driving business, could be a deal problem, could be anything. Everything and anything is open. So who'd like to start? I'd love to hear somebody tell me about a challenge or an opportunity that they've had right now. Anybody? Come on, somebody's got to have something.
I'll go. I've had this ongoing challenge with a listing, and I think we're all fine now. But it's a relative, so there's a little piece of that in there too, with family all trying to get involved, which is neat. But my client has memory issues big time, and so it's working with them and putting everything in writing, and then going there a whole lot more than I would normally go somewhere, right. And then she forgot I was there, and then just working with her power of attorney and all that stuff. So I don't know that it's just been very interesting, and I've definitely learned a lot, but I've also noticed that I tried as hard as I could to mitigate these things from the jump. And then if other people are putting in input from outside, it really can disrupt that. And so we're now back to where I started with our plan. But in the meantime, we had a whole bunch of rigmarole.
Right.
Like it was just a little crazy. I am curious if anybody has had success with estate sales. If people find that that's truly worth it, if the items in the house are just kind of fine, you know what I mean, like not super great, like they hold value to the person living there. I'm just curious about estate sales in general, if anybody has experience with them, if they're worth it. Really what we ended up with was a company that just kind of cleans out your houses, which is what they truly needed. And if they can sell some of those items in their consignment store, they credit that back to your bill, which I think was the best route to go. But for a while, she really wanted to do an estate sale, and I couldn't find like a reputable company that I thought she'd actually make the money back in, et cetera. So.
Yeah, so I'll go just real quick because I have had the opportunity to have similar situations, and I will tell you, Kathy, more times than not, if there's not a family member that has kind of latched onto the notion and already called an estate planning company, or excuse estate planning, an estate sale company. I just left the lawyer, so we were doing estate planning, so that was a Freudian slip there. My apologies, but you know, you'll find that most estates, there isn't enough value in the items that remain after you know, the family has kind of taken their pick of the litter, so to speak. And if there is, generally there's been something. I see a little one running back and forth there. I like that.
Like,
Kind of peering in. That's the beauty of Zoom. There's never a dull moment. You can always get kind of moving. So back and forth, that like running laps. I like it.
You know, trying not to be seen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Doesn't want to be seen, right. Hey, listen, I've done that before. You know, don't listen to me. I just want to be on the back. But by the way, me. Yeah, I got that. So but at any rate, yeah, usually people think, you know, oh gosh, there's going to be something here left. And you know that in 1976, when we bought this console, it was, you know, state of the art. It was worth, you know, $4,000. And so it's at least held its value, or maybe it's an antique, you know, all this crazy stuff. And so what I always tell people is just have a reputable estate company, 2, preferably 3 if you've got time, come in, evaluate it, and give you a bid and say what they think the value is. And then more times than not, the juice isn't going to be worth the squeeze. And they say, hey, you're going to have to write us a check for more than likely $1,000 at the end of this. So you're better off having a garage sale and getting a hauler, you know. And more times than not, once it's gotten to the realtor, that is the realm that you're in, because people they think, you know, the value of this stuff is going to be so substantial, but they forget that people have their time and energy to get it all set up, and they're in business, they have to make money on it. And it just rarely, my experience is, if it gets to that point, almost always it makes more sense to just kind of do a garage sale and then get a hauler. Almost always, not always, but almost always. It's been my experience.
I would agree with Tom. I mean, I've done it a couple of times, and it seems more beneficial towards the family when it's more of an estate situation. You know, like the parents maybe have passed on, and the kids are involved, and the kids are responsible for getting rid of or cleaning out the house. And if they just don't want to deal with it, they're like, fine, do whatever, hire whoever you want to come in, clean it out, and we'll pay. Then it's absolutely, when it's more about the time and dealing with the stuff versus getting the money out of it.
Yeah, that was articulated better than I said. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's how this started, and then she kind of looked around at the items because she was still in the house for the time being, and it's because she's still involved. They're not passed away. They're just moving out of state. And so they had taken the items that they're taking with them. And then we're sitting in the house with the rest of the items and seeing all this value that I think kept throwing, okay, well, actually, I do want this and blah, 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 blah. And it was just insanity for a couple weeks.
And so I've kind of come to and I know that's not always possible, but I've kind of come to this real new appreciation for the notion that if people can not be in a house when it's going to be sold, God bless that situation, because it is always better. I mean, like when the market was red hot, and this is a little bit different situation, but I would always be, and this is what I did one time. I was like, I'm telling you what, I'm going to give you guys your benefit of our relationship from the standpoint of a gift at the beginning. I'm going to pay for you to go 2 nights to Kansas City. I'm going to pay for your hotel room. Go. Because having them out, when we were putting stuff on Thursday nights or whatever, and then showing start Friday, and then we're going to review on Sunday, having those people out of that house for those 2 to 3 days is like the greatest gift of mankind, because inevitably by Saturday night, after they've been gone for 16 hours and their kids are screaming and 3 of them have gum in their hair and whatever else, you kind of lost their best being from the standpoint of getting to even if you have multiple offers, on Sunday, they look war torn and, you're going through these offers. So as a general rule, not always, if you have empty nesters and their stuff looks killer in there and they're not going to be hardly around at all and they don't care, different story. But young children, elderly people, it makes a lot of sense a lot of times not to have them in the dwelling, especially if you've got a situation where you've got an isolated period, with the market the way it was so robust. Now it's clearly evolving and there's a shift coming. But at that time, I was just like, God, just to get people out is just such a gift, because they have quality of life and you have an opportunity to just roll your sleeves up and get the thing sold. So just a thought in regard to that. So Bridget had something. Bridget, why don't you? Jackie, how are you? It's good to see you, by the way. How are you?
Thank you. Sorry, I was addressing all my monthly mailers and I forgot.
You know what?
You're good.
No problem. I'll just say I wasn't late. I was right on time. Anyway, next.
He was waiting on me.
Yeah. Bridget's got something.
So this is just kind of a specific question that came up for me yesterday, and so I figured I'd just hang on to it and ask you today.
Yeah.
So I have an accepted contract for my listing right now, and while we were countering back and forth, he gave me the last counter, and one of the borrowers had not signed it. And I asked him about it, and he said, oh, well, I didn't realize he wasn't on the loan, so now we're not going to have him buying the house. So I asked him, well, I need an addendum or something that shows that, he's no longer on this. So he ended up like writing it into the counter and then sending it back, but it's still missing, so all the paperwork now has both people's signatures and all of his signatures pretty much on everything. And then on the very last counter, it just says, one of the borrowers has dropped, out of this contract. And so I guess my question is, do I need to, is that okay? Do I need to just do I need to do an addendum? Do I need to redo the whole thing?
Are they a married couple?
Yeah.
Okay, so in essence, the other person that's not participatory in the loan, so there's kind of 2 things here. So the first thing I always say is, this sounds this is like real world, like I pardon the lack of polish, but it's kind of, I put things in the buckets of like, okay, that matters, and that's like 1 in 100,000. I don't care about that because I can't go into 1 in 100,000. So the biggest thing is, what does the lender say? If the lender says, hey, if they're on the contract, then they need to be a party to the loan, which sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. It just kind of depends. It depends on the product they're using, the underwriting, whatever. The first thing I would do if it ever goes to a title issue is you've got to meaning who's on title. First thing I always do is go to the lender. And if the lender says, hey, yeah, this person, because it's sometimes you have both people on title, Bridget, and both people aren't on the loan. That can happen. So that's not an impossibility. Less common for a myriad of reasons, but not uncommon. From the standpoint, if it was your buyer, we care a little more, obviously, because then they're going to own the property. From that standpoint, their marital interest is going to take precedence anyway. So it doesn't matter per se if the person isn't on title to the property from the standpoint of what their ultimate interest is, because in Nebraska they're going to have marital interest anyway.
Right.
So there's that piece of it. So the first thing I would do in that instance is I would talk to the lender and say, how do you want this to look? Because the last thing you want to do is have it in the counter and then in underwriting they say, oh, this is all screwed up, we don't like this, and actually the ratios are close and we do want that person's income and yada, 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 yada. So the first thing I would do is say, hey, I want to talk to the lender about what they feel about this, and then ask them, how they want it to read. Because from a real estate perspective, once you're, especially as a seller, once we divest our interest and the other party holds title, we don't care if it's Tom, Dick, or Harry. We just, we've got to be frank. We just want, seller gets their money and moves on.
Right.
Look at how cute. So cute. Oh my gosh. So I think at that point, that's what I would do. I would get the paperwork in line with what the lender wants, because at the end of the day, the real estate commission, they don't really care, per se, who's buying the house. They just want to know that you have a valid contract and that it's been. The only thing that you would be a little bit concerned about is if you got down the road is if the other person's on the contract and they could somehow try to nullify the contract when they weren't necessarily going to be a principal party to the contract. And they can say, well, actually, there's a document here that says, or there's a counter here that says I wasn't involved in the contract. And then you'd have an issue where the seller would say, well, you've got to give me the earnest deposit because you're backing out. And they're like, well, actually, I'm not backing out. I was never part of the contract. And then you have this big tug of war. So I would get it clarified in an addendum, but I would get it clarified in an addendum with language that the lender is happy.
Okay. So, I mean, I guess technically, since I'm the listing agent, I mean, normally this wouldn't be something that I would do, right? Like, I mean, if I would be thinking that this normally would be something that the buyer's agent would do, is contact their buyer's lender, I mean, I can do it certainly, but like, just want to clarify, like, normally this wouldn't be something that would be my responsibility.
Correct. Yeah, I agree with your premise is correct. The only reason that you might want to consider looking at it is in the event that it goes awry, it could be to your seller's detriment. Right. So I'm always trying to be polite and not overstep, but I also try to be thorough, because at the end of the day, you can be nice about it, but at the end of the day, what you care about is getting to August 20th, whatever that day is, and making sure that title, transfers correctly and that your seller gets their money, right? Because that's your fiduciary obligation, is to take care of your seller. So while normally I agree with you, it seems a little counterintuitive for you to be engaged in the buyer's finances. I think you could play it off as, hey, I just want to make sure that I'm meeting the expectation of the parties in order to not only facilitate the transaction, but make sure that the ancillary parties, i.e. the lender, is satisfied with the paperwork so we can achieve our objective, which is transferring the property. So that would be, and you could even say to the buyer's agent, hey, why don't we just do a conference call with the lender and ask them what they want to do? And there's a way to do it. and then, I mean, if it's an issue where you're like, well, I feel like I'm doing both sides of the transaction, I get that. But if it's an issue where you don't want to step on toes, there's a way to handle that too,
Yeah.
if that makes any
Yeah,
sense.
I don't mind doing it. And I think it would make me feel better to just, I'm not getting a lot of response from the other agent. So I feel like I would feel better to just to do it myself. And that
Yeah.
way I feel like it's done and I know what's going on and it's not going to be a problem and, wash my
Yeah, and you
hands of
could
it.
just, and you could even tell the other, you could even send an email to the, if you can get the lender's email and copy the
Mhm.
buyer's agent and just say,
Okay.
hey, I'm going to be calling you. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, that the paperwork that's been executed is adequate for the purposes of the bank, and that it will pass underwriting, and just make sure that everybody's on the same page and that we have a successful conclusion to this transaction. Just that simple. And I think if you involve the other party, meaning the buyer's agent, in the email, they can't say, oh, you went behind my back, or you did this or did that. Usually the agents that you send 37 texts to and they don't respond to are the first ones that raise their hand and say you went behind their back. And you're like, okay, not really, but if you would have ever responded. So,
Yeah,
Mhm.
but you just have to kind of, that's the way I would approach it. I don't know if
Bridget,
anybody
I
else
think
has
you're
a-
gonna have, I'm sorry, Tom.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think you're gonna have to do this throughout the whole transaction. I mean, Tom, this agent that Bridget's working with has been, I'll just say, challenging and difficult to work with. So I think, Bridge, you're gonna have to, from now until closing, you're gonna have to have your hand and do so in the right way. But I think it's to your best interest.
Yeah.
Yeah, bummer. But yeah, I mean, here's what I would tell you, Bridget. I would err on the side of being more involved, even if I would try to develop rapport with them, but I would err on the side of being more involved, because at the end of the day, while you want a good working relationship, I always say you catch more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. At the
Mhm.
end of the day, your responsibility financially, behaviorally, and everything else is to the seller. It's not your responsibility in the end for the buyer's agent to want to have Christmas dinner with you. Although that would be lovely. That's not that's not where, that's
Right.
not where your allegiance is, your obligations legally and certainly professionally would land. So I just think sometimes you got to be the leader in the situation. And if you can do it kind of in a careful way so everybody's happy, then that's great.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks.
So yeah, so Jackie, I'm gonna pick on you since you weren't. Do you have anything that you're thinking about that seems, that you're struggling with in a deal, or trying to get deals, or whatever that you'd like to talk about? Is there anything that's coming to mind?
Not really, because I have such a small database, but I do have one client, so so that's some progress.
How's that
So-
going?
Oh, well, I'm slowly building my database. Like I said, I'm addressing my August stuff, and basically took the guy who actually referred me to his mother. I actually took him out for appetizers and drinks last night. So like a business thing. So that was good. And
Awesome.
so the lady who's using me is a cash buyer, which is always good.
Wonderful.
And yeah. So.
And have you been out with her yet?
So she is out of North Platte. She is selling her house herself. It is under contract. So when she comes here, we will kind of look, but she wants to wait until she's officially closed on the house and got that cash. And then they're letting her stay in the house for 3 weeks.
Great.
So she can find something here. So we'll have a 3-week, very rushed thing to find a house. So that's kind of where we are. Yeah.
So
So
yeah,
she's on the email list. She gets emails daily about what's coming up. I've already set her up on all that.
Great.
I text with her once a week to check in, kind of see how things are going on her end with her house. And so, yeah, so we're getting there.
And how does that feel? How has that experience felt?
Oh, I like it. She's great. She and I just chat. We get on the phone and we end up chatting for like an hour. She's
Great.
she's great. So we get along really well. And she's told me she totally trusts me. Of course, I haven't told her she's my first client ever, but she totally trusts me. And so far it's working out working out well. So
Good, good.
Yep.
And is there anything in the process that's been challenging for you in regard to just getting her up to speed? Is there been any roadblocks, any questions that have stumped you along the way thus far?
I think the only thing, and I asked Tim about it during one of our, I think, Buffini things. Our only issue is that she's been separated for like 4 years and she's not officially divorced. And so my question was, if she purchases a home here, even though he's not, of course, on the title of that, could that become an issue later on, 6 months, a year down the road? And so we discussed that a little bit, but there really hasn't been anything.
Yeah, and was the answer on that so usually what we try to do is get an affidavit of marital non-involvement or
Okay.
something of that nature. So
Okay.
I don't know if that's been discussed. But
she's working. So like I said, she sold her house in North Platte herself, but what she's done is her attorney out there for her whole marriage situation is fully involved in the sale of the house.
Okay.
They actually, the contract that was signed, the people who are under contract with her signed it through that same attorney. So this attorney is heavily involved. So
that's good.
There's
so
that. Yeah.
That's good. So I would say to her when we're getting close, hey, mate, let's make sure that now, is that her divorce attorney or just a general attorney?
No, apparently this attorney out there is doing all of it.
Okay, well, good. Well, one-stop shop, and he's judging the firemen too, huh? So that's. I
guess that's the benefit of living in North Platte. I mean,
hey, actually, there is some benefit. All seriousness, not being my normal obnoxious self, there is some benefit to that because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that that there is communication, because a lot of times if the attorney has a path forward from a legal standpoint and has rapport with the other divorce attorney, they can work something out in short order and get kind of things figured out. And so that is a case study for, you definitely want to defer to that professional advisor that they have in place. And it's another example of, when things get really hairy on stuff, where we do want to take a step back. And even though our gut tells us that we've got the best answer, if it's legal in nature, we want to take a step back and say, that's really something that needs to be addressed by an attorney. And that can go down two paths, right? It may be something that you bring to me if it's involved, if it doesn't raise to the level of the parties being in conflict. So this is a learning opportunity. So when for example, if we had something where let's say Bridget's seller, let's say that goes south. It's not going to, Bridget, I'm not jinxing it, but let's say something went bad and the buyer jacked up their financing and they got a denial letter because really they got cold feet. And let's just say on this deal, it was of consequence. Let's say this is hypothetical. Let's say the earnest deposit was $15,000, for example. Well, in that particular instance, so it's worth fighting for, right? And because they're not going to perform. Let's say the buyer is not performing. In that particular instance, what I would do, presumably I would get a call from Bridget. I would give her some general guidelines about what we've experienced historically in cases that are of this similarity or consequence, with the caveat that we're not attorneys, and then in the event that this becomes some sort of conflict, they will need to engage their own counsel because they're going to have some sort of conflict, because we're not, as a company, the distinction is, as brokerage and as an agent, we're not a party to the contract. So we are not participants in the contract. We are facilitators of the contract. So we wouldn't be litigating the matter on their behalf, because a lot of agents at the beginning, they're like, well, will our lawyer handle? Well, there's a conflict of interest, right? Because the reason that, and we don't say this to the client, but the reason that we wouldn't have our counsel handle it is twofold. First reason is that we're not a party to the contract, so we don't have any standing in the contract, right? So we don't have, if we were to bring suit against the party, we could only bring suit for like trying to capture, you know, the commission or something, which we would never do, but that practically we would never do. So that's one thing. The second reason is why is because it's inherently conflict, because in the off chance that that person gets pissed off enough, they could sue us, right? And then our attorney would essentially be in you know, embroiled in this thing, and then they would conflict out and it would be this whole mess. So in that instance, we would make sure that they would get outside counsel if it got elevated to that point. Now, if it's, hey, can you memorialize in a general sense these three things, and it goes outside of my depth where I don't feel comfortable with it, would I engage our attorney in a hypothetical? Yes. And then we do that quite frequently. But once it gets to the point where a demand letter is going to get written or something of that nature, it's important that they engage their own counsel to facilitate that for all the reasons that I just stated. So that's an important distinction. Now, if there's something that, you know, where it makes sense for us to evaluate a term or something, or if there's something that we've done as agents that's like, or we just totally blew it, like whatever, then we would take that back to our counsel and say, what do you think? And then if necessary, we call our errors and omissions and what have you. I know that that's a little convoluted, but you kind of get the sense of where those demarcations are from the standpoint of responsibility.
So you had mentioned something about having an affidavit of something from her attorney. What is that called? And should I get one of those? You know, I know they're supposed to go to court in September in relation to this divorce moving forward. I don't know what type of hearing that is.
So what I would ask the attorney is, what document do you want me to get signed by the seller potentially, or by, you know, the parties, that will ultimately protect our mutual client from having her estranged spouse have interest in the property? And I would ask them that in that general sense, because depending on how the negotiation is going with the other party, meaning the other attorney on the other side, presumably, or maybe just the other party if they're unrepresented, it's going to be relevant to how they're going to approach it. So it might be something as detailed as outlining other assets that are going to be divested and horse traded that way. So it's important that you engage the attorney, because there might be nuance in the way that it's ultimately going to be negotiated, and the legal consequence of that could be quite great. And if you've got a document signed that just says, you know, hey, so-and-so says they're not going to be involved in it, you know, that might not be good enough from the standpoint of taking care of it. So you'll definitely want to engage your client's counsel to help you. Now, it might be something simple enough for you to draft, or it might be something that they want to draft, but you're definitely going to want to have engagement so you can make sure that you're facilitating, you know, and protecting her interests. Okay. So there's not a fill in the blank on that one. You got to talk to somebody, meaning the attorney.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Great. Let's see. Somebody said something about something. Oh,
Jackie,
the attorney.
Kathy had asked which attorney that is that your client's working with.
You don't have to say. There's only so many attorneys in Norfolk, and I was just wondering if it was a friend.
Oh, you know what? I don't know. Like I said, her soon to be ex or whatever, he is already, he already came off the current house she's in. And then so he's already off the party to the house she's in. And so basically since she did the sale of the house herself, she's just had this attorney do the paperwork, because of course she's not an agent and can't do the paperwork. So she's just had the attorney kind of be the party in the middle, so to speak, on the sale of her house. But she hasn't given me the name, but I can.
I was just curious.
I said, yeah, no, there are only so many attorneys.
I was like, probably. I have a totally different question that I was just thinking about. Is there, and Raquel would probably hang me for even asking this, if there is like somebody you kind of want to do a deal pro bono for or close to it, is there like a minimum Better Homes wants us to charge? I know we have to at least cover the buyer's agent's commission. And then I just don't know if there's kind of a a certain expectations that Better Homes has for, aside from that administration fee. Yeah.
So basically, we simply ask you to sign over all interest in all checking, savings, and investment accounts that you have, and then you can. No, I'm kidding. That was bad joke. Bad joke. No, here's our policy. When our policy has always been. So we believe that each agent should be empowered to run their business in the manner that's appropriate for them and their clients. So we've never set commission minimums because we believe that we don't have to have policies in place if you have the right people. They're going to make good judgments about our collective business interests together. So we believe in empowering the real estate professional. So if there's a situation that presents itself that, and I'm going to do it, your comment couldn't be more timely. I'm doing it. I'm going to do it here in about a month. A family gentleman got paralyzed and they need help. And so I'm going to do it. The only thing we do that we require is that in the event it's in the MLS, so if you're the buyer's agent and it's in the MLS at 2.4%, then our deal with Better Homes and Gardens is we have to pay our royalty on that 2.4%. So we would charge you that back. However, if you're the listing agent and it's not in the MLS, the only requirement that we have as an organization is the BAC fee. It's just the $350. And the reason we charge that is we have to process the file and there's costs in that. And that's essentially break even for us. So we're not out of pocket, to do it. But if you want to list a property at 2.4% and pay out the 2.4% to the buyer's agent and then say, hey, the 2.4% is waived in the event that you find the buyer, you 100% can do that. Now, if you said you wanted to do that every day, all month, and do 30 of those a year, we're going to obviously have to have a conversation. But yes, do we believe, and there's times where we need to be charitable. There's times where there's family members. There's times where we might have our own one-off investment property. There's times that it's appropriate, necessary, fair, and it's near and dear to our philosophy that everybody's afforded the right to run their business the way they want to run it. And if we go to work as a company for the right people, we know that they're generally going to make very good decisions. And in 5.5 years, knock on wood, it's worked just famously, and we haven't had any problems. And we've been able to help some people that really needed help, and that's great. And more power to you. It needs to happen sometimes, and we want to be good stewards of the community. And in certain instances, it's the right thing to do.
Just to clarify, I can still list it in the MLS though, correct? Just something
100%.
you said. Okay.
Yeah, you can list in the MLS. If you're a buyer's agent, let's say you have let's say you have a buyer that is just circling the drain, but they have enough to get in the house. Maybe they're a cash buyer, but they have no cash, and they're in a bad way. They sold a house for $1 million. They ended up with $100,000, and they've got to get $100,000 to get this little itty bitty condo because they're flat broke and they're almost trying to save it in bankruptcy or something. And they need the 2.4% back. And you're like, you know what? They need the money worse than I do. I'm going to help them. Better Homes and Gardens, because they've got an aggregated sense of things, and they've got to look at it kind of like Mean Gene and the type of the ivory tower. They just say, to protect their interests, because they don't know what's going on the ground, they just say if there's a published rate, we have to pay the royalty on the published rate. So what we do is, instead of charging your split, which obviously we would have some margin to run the business, whatever, we reduce that to just the royalty, and then you just pay that. So it works out pretty well, because really you're talking 7%. So then if you had a $2,400 commission, then 7% of that's $180 or whatever. So they could still give them the lion's share of the benefit, what have you. So, but on the listing side, as long as it's not published, it can absolutely be zero. And then we just still have the policy of the BAC fee, but that's it. Yeah. And you can absolutely do it at 0, 100%.
Oh, thank you.
I shouldn't probably say 100% because that makes it more confusing.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. But yeah, great question. Okay. Hey, Tim
Julia.
Reeder.
Sorry, I had the bad job of having to help taste food at the Cottonwood Hotel. So,
Oh, geez.
yeah.
Well, I'm glad
to
that
get
your
ready
life.
for stage.
I'm glad that your life's so hard. The rest of us, don't worry about it. We've been slaving away.
I know. Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks for winging it here. I appreciate you guys. And I hope you've had some good questions.
Yeah, we've had good dialogue, I think. We got in the weeds on some legal stuff, but I think it's healthy. It's good stuff. Julia, we haven't heard from our friend Julia. Are you driving?
I am driving safely though.
Good.
So I'm here mostly just to listen. I don't have any burning questions right now.
Okay.
But I always gain a lot from these. And you know, business wise, I just keep putting my head down and working hard and working my database. And I've started to get a few. Sorry, I'm like in gravel right now in the middle of cornfields. These people live so far away. Anyway, I'm starting to get a few leads. They're not super hot leads, but kind of getting there. So I'm starting to see a little progress coming from that. So I'm just gonna keep sticking with it and stay positive. So
Good.
Awesome.
Well, you be safe. We won't pick on you then because we don't want any like corn stalks through your radiator or anything. That would be bad. So
yeah, been there, done that.
Yeah, I've ran into a cornfield, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah.
So this was good stuff. Who has anything else like a weird one-off, or Rhonda, do you have anything that would
Well,
be
I
helpful?
do. If no one else has another question, so Bridget and I are mentees, and I wondered if you had any advice for her and everyone else. So Bridget's family, they do some flips and then she buys them, they flip them and they relist it. Do you have any advice for her as the listing agent of these properties on how to, I guess, stay out of trouble, anything that she really needs to know and that could benefit her and anyone else that's thinking of flipping?
Yeah, 100%. Great question. Really appreciate the question. And I've had that experience. So one of the reasons, and I'll just be on, and you shouldn't take this as a reason not to do it, because there's a lot of realtors that are very successful flipping houses and, run into more opportunities than others. So please don't take this as an indictment, but of the idea, concept, business model, what have you. I chose about 2 years ago to stop just because I was concerned that it might affect my reputational component. And I wasn't so much worried about it as a realtor. I was more worried about that. What if I get sideways with somebody and then, that would be one of our agents' clients or what have you. So my situation was a little different. I didn't want to do it to the detriment of the realtors in our company. So it's a little different dynamic. But what I will tell you is if you flipped a house, at some level, you've had a disgruntled buyer, because unfortunately, we don't know what's behind a wall that we didn't open up. Right. And your family's in the inspection business, and you get, sometimes people are like, well, did you know that this, 6 months later, we have this leak? And you're like, well, okay, first of all, we don't know when the leak started. And we certainly, we don't open up drywall. I mean, we can't take the drywall down off of every wall, right? So at the end of the day, it's a little bit like that, Bridget. And I know I'm speaking kind of specifically to you, but it's not dissimilar to the inspection game in the sense that you do your very best. And what I would say on the property condition disclosures is you're better off being extremely aggressive on what you're disclosing, in the sense of just get it all out there. Because I have found with clients many times that they will deal with stuff, gloss over the property disclosure. It's amazing what they will accept at the time of offer. But boy, oh boy, the minute they close, you're the devil, and you didn't say this quite right. So I would always over disclose. I would always and I don't know if you guys are doing, how you feel about it. And you can do what you want. It's not for me to say, but you're asked, or well, you didn't have, but Rhonda, I would probably have them pre-inspected with another company. So there's not, conflict of interest. So they can't say, oh, this is all part of this master plan. Not that you would be unethical, but that, because then you have another layer, right? And that's there. You have what you have another inspection company that has independently and objectively analyzed it. And so what we're trying to do is build as many barriers between us and somebody's perception of our dishonesty or whatever that there could possibly be. So over disclosing, I think a third party inspection is, I'm sure you could trade out with a friend in the business that, not, and I think you have to have a very finite understanding that just like any other inspection, we're not asking for favorability or anything, but maybe they do some property stuff too, and maybe you trade that or something. So maybe there's not a hard cost to it, which doesn't mean that the inspection is unethical. It doesn't mean that at all, as long as people are abiding by their obligations in that regard. But I think anything you can do to create, first of all, documenting any and all things that are wrong with the house, anything that some other, have it kind of corroborated by a third party, and then have them make sure they sign, even developing an addendum, and we can help with this, and we should probably have it, that says, listen, I hold a real estate license in the state of Nebraska, even though you'll disclose that in the purchase agreement, and go through and say, we have made every effort to disclose any and all issues as it relates to this house. We've had it pre-inspected by this company. We're providing a copy of that. We have filled out the seller property condition disclosure statement to the best of our ability. We are being transparent on everything that we know to be of any consequence from a materiality perspective as it relates to this house. But no house is perfect. And, and in the event that there's something post-closing, you're buying this house, once we're past the inspection period, in as is condition, and anything that's wrong with this house is your responsibility, and you're accepting that responsibility and getting another one-pager sign that says that. Having said that, it doesn't mitigate your responsibility to do all the things that I said, because you want to stack the deck. Because if I'm being honest, if we go down to Lincoln to the kangaroo court, you're going to be guilty until proven innocent, not vice versa. So it ain't America down there. I should say that. That sounds really negative. But what I'm saying is that their job is to protect the consumer. And if we go to court, if it goes, assuming it's on a regular purchase agreement, it goes to regular, meaning Great Plains. If it goes to arbitration, binding arbitration, or mediation, and ultimately binding arbitration, even though it's an adhesion contract that they wrote, your professional expertise will be used against you. So you want to make sure that you have your I's dotted and T's crossed. Does that mean don't do it? No. It just means that when you do it, there's a level of professionalism that it goes beyond the pale. You're doing all the things to try to make sure that you're fully disclosed. Now, does that mean that if you've got some rotten siding that you have to replace it? Absolutely not. It just means that you have to disclose it. So it's all about articulating, because we have a big deal right now with the buyer. Oh boy, do we. And it's unbelievable. And this person's like, well, they're from California, and they're like, well, this siding's bad. They have to replace it. And this is post-closing. I'm like, why do you think that? Well, in California, there's a lemon law. They have to replace this and that. And I said, well, I'm sorry that I'm uneducated about California statute, but in Nebraska, houses pass, transfer with code violations every day, both that are materially disclosed and registered to the city or otherwise. I mean, you can transfer real property with defects of any kind. What you can't do is not disclose a material defect that you had knowledge of as a realtor or as an owner. You have to disclose it. The house could be falling down and it can transfer. You just have to tell them it's falling down, right? So it's important, I think, over disclosing, giving everybody all the information that they could possibly need, to make an informed decision, and then reiterating to them in an addendum that they're making an informed decision. And then once you've done everything right, and it goes, and the one is going to go south at every 20 or 25, you settle it, you move on. And that's just the way the world works.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom.
I've got to roll because I got to go to, I've got to be at 49th and Farnham, and I actually had to get to my house so I could get on this. So I've got 17th Street. So I have to go. I hope nobody feels cheated. Their ears are probably bleeding. They'll probably be happy that I'm off. But
No,
Well,
not at all.
Tom, thank you very much for doing this. This was very generous of you. I know we didn't really have a subject. It was more like a chime in and talk, and I appreciate you winging it. And of course, I also appreciate Rhonda stepping in at the very last minute and doing this for me as well. So
yeah, no,
thank
Rhonda
you.
was an outstanding moderator and always is, and she's a delight. And everybody we had great comments, and I thought it was a great conversation. And it is always my obligation, but privilege to be in on these things. So it is far from going outside or whatever. I'm thrilled to do it, and it's my job, and it's my job to work for you. Remember, you guys, we work for you. You don't work for us. So it's a pleasure to work for all of you. You're great people, and I appreciate so much your time. So everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Tom. You as well. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.